what I want to do is read a story that's set in Brevard, North Carolina. Actually, though I was born in Los Angeles, we moved to Durham, North Carolina when I was probably 1.5, 2 years old, and then we returned to LA. But so I had that beautiful time there was a creek running through the property, the forest was down the hill, and my best friends were turtles, and I had this beautiful, like in the dirt kind of childhood that I really cherish. That is a little harder to get to here living in Los Angeles. And so the story that I'm going to read is called Late Blooming, and it's about 10 minutes long. And there are maybe 3 or 4 salty words, and I'm just going to say them because Stephanie let me know that we don't have to be censored here. So, late blooming. Oh, one other thing I'll say is that there are just 2 characters in this story. One is an artist who's being interviewed by the interviewer, and this is in the space in between, just after the interview. Okay, late blooming. As a child, Salome Snow painted the birds and mice her cats killed. She'd forgotten about it up until this moment when the interviewer asks where this series of paintings come from. Even the title of Kaczynski's novel, which she hadn't read, never reminded her either. As they sit at her breakfast table in the studio, Salome tells the interviewer that she painted the dead birds and mice. He smiles, thin-lipped. She realizes he doesn't understand that she painted their tiny corpses and laid them out under the house, checking each day for the aesthetic state the flies and maggots had left them in. Her cats would not touch them, and the guts looked to her as if they were weeping color. There was no gardener. Her mother never wandered, and her father didn't seem to know anything about terrestrial joy. She omits these details because the interviewer doesn't deserve any texture to his story, and it will be no reflection on her. Salome is not her real name. She won't admit this. While envying all children born during the past 20 years when parents were more imaginative. Tedious though these parents are, fussing over children, not letting them be, not letting them find their way. She sees her friends doing this. She asks aloud why these parents are not more involved in their own lives. The interviewer smiles and squints. He has that cocky expression people get when they think they are beginning to figure her out. As if in protest, her grandmother's quilt falls from the wall. Salome glances at it as he gets up with too much concern to observe the rip, torn in many places as it is. Though the interviewer is dressed like a preppy, his underwear shows as he bends to pick it up. Salome rolls her eyes. This is why she moved from Los Angeles. This is why she moved from New York to live in Brevard, North Carolina. Yes, and even away from Asheville, she explains aloud, to be in perfect peace. He picks up the ball spoon from the Ivory Coast and asks about Jane. Salome wonders how he knows about her when she didn't live here but a month. She pours herself the last dregs of coffee, licks the smooth bottom line of her front 2 top teeth. He tells her he wishes the photographer was here this morning to get that picture of her luminous brown skin and white hair, as Salome cups a small white bowl of coffee with both hands. He's looking at her now like he can't believe she's 39. She is really 46, but knows she passes for 30 in his eyes. Before she dyed her hair white a decade ago, she still got carded, but didn't enjoy it since it was hard enough to be taken seriously. Salome then shaved her years to make the under 40 New York art world buzz. The interviewer wants to see the garden. She follows him through the junked back door. It's October, she explains. It's overgrown. The vegetables and blooms are gone. but look how far into the woods her property extends. He scratches the back of his head, and a tuft of ochre hair remains lifted. He looks up at the drying dogwood, then at her, and she notices the dimples. In this moment, he is Cynthia, who looks like a baby demon because she never knew what pain felt like. Salome could gnaw on her pink nipples until they pitied only her. He isn't looking at the sickle-shaped sculpture, which draws in everyone else. And this is when she realizes he isn't as stupid as he seems. He stares at her, planting her in place. The neighbor steps out on the porch, so Salome announces further how she keeps to herself, though in fact, she fucked the old man one afternoon for the hot cinnamon sweet pumpkin pie from scratch he'd left at her door. He waves, but she doesn't wave back. Rum cookies, powdered sugar brownies, fruit or angel cakes didn't work again for him. Neither did another pumpkin pie better than the first. He nourished her once, she nourished him once, and she'd weaned herself from penis anyway. The interviewer sits down on the metal chair Jane made. Salome gives her due credit and asks if he's been to the scrap exchange in Durham. He hasn't. She rubs her hands together. People usually leave with that gesture. He doesn't have his notebook or his phone out on record here, and it's been at least 10 minutes. He tells her how much she'll like the photographer, and she doesn't tell him she already knows her from school. He doesn't know that much about the photographer then. Salome reminds him about the show she's getting ready for in London. He wants to see the pieces. She thought she'd already shown him. He asks if he can use her restroom. Salome warns him that she just broke the porcelain sink. A heavy glass bottle of shea butter cream slipped from the cabinet. She tells him to wash his hands in the kitchen when he's finished. He smiles as if at his mother. The cat follows him to the bathroom, but he shuts her out. She lays at the door, a feathery dust mop with small glowing eye bulbs, dramatic in rejection. Salome returns to the drawing table where he found her more than the hour ago. He'd knocked on the screen, which irritated her. She can smell him from the bathroom and hopes he'll open the window wider. He has also lit a cigarette, which will not help. Salome lights the copal incense on Jane's shelf of African collectibles from her travels. She'd promised to come back for them. If she doesn't, Salome will give every last one away, even the remarkable calming spoon. He's in the kitchen, obediently washing his hands. He asks where she got the skull. She doesn't want him to touch it, so she hurries in to hover. He says his friend, a forensic anthropologist, showed him some of the more pronounced differences in the orbital space, the nose bridge and jawline between Africans, Asians, and Europeans. She shrugs. That much still won't tell you where it came from. He agrees. He explains he was in the service with this friend years ago, and that this friend was the one who realized first that he would no longer fall in line. He inspired him in late blooming. She didn't guess this. He says his friend has a large collection of bones from a pillaged gravesite of yellow fever victims. Salome nods, suppresses a yawn, wetting her eyes. She refuses to go any more personal than this. She leads him to the entryway. When she asks where they put him up in Asheville, she doesn't know the hotel. He puts his hands in his pockets, stares into her eyes again without saying anything. He finally asks for a dinner recommendation. The tapas place near Malaprop's bookstore is the only thing that comes to mind. He's fine with that. He says his sister is now a horsewoman in Arizona. His favorite horse, the most beautiful, is dark chocolate with a white silvery mane. She's very playful with a sharp sense of humor, He says he can see how his sister falls in love with these creatures, though he doesn't believe in riding them. Salome looks behind her, trying to find the image of a horse anywhere. Bolder, he comes toward her to shake her firm hand, tell her what a pleasure it was talking with her, how much he enjoys her work. He looks up at one of the bird paintings. Salome has yet to hear any impressions of them. Instead, he says Kiki Smith said that birds are stand-ins for souls. That makes no sense whatsoever, she answers. Birds are souls. What exhausting human superiority. He smiles with more pink in his cheek, light in his eyes. He puts his hand on his chest with humility. Salome takes his hand and places it on her neck. His thumb first rests on her clavicle, then feels the shape of it. The thumb moves up Adam's apple to the chin, pressing in just beneath her bottom lip before smashing it open, revealing red gum. The thumb now between her teeth, she unzips her jeans, takes his head with both hands, dirty nails scratching his scalp. She pushes him down to kneel. As he tastes her, licking the alphabet on her clit, she'll make herself come, pretending he is the teacher. She tries giving him a hardwood floor burn as she rides him, but when he knocks his head against the front door, she cradles it as he tries to kiss her. She gives him her ear as he bites, baking bread of her nipple, shooting into her. She crouches over him now, his mouth gleaming with spit. Send the story to me before turning it in, she whispers. He smiles, his hands still closed. Do it, she says, and he nods, yes, before giggling. It rings like a little boy being tickled. She stands up, shirt hanging off, looking at the pile of him. Why shouldn't he sleep right there? He would have left without pad or recorder anyway. And the story is just beginning. I would love to take some questions now or comments, anything, have a discussion as the best we can.
Thank you, Lisa. That was a great reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love how you just really took your time with the words. Yeah, really, so you could create pictures. It was great. Let's start by talking about the setting of that story, and really just that as a lead into one of the things about the book, which is the variety of settings.
Yes.
You have people all over the world, stories set all over the world. And so one would guess that you yourself have been all over the world. And so, yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about how you came to write about Asheville. Thank you so much for mentioning Malaprops, and I'll go ahead and mention Zombra by name as well, since that's the tapas place that's right downstairs. It's just below us. Thank you, we appreciate you. So yeah, tell us a little bit about Asheville, and also the fact that you also pointed at, this artist living in Brevard and not Asheville. People around here will know Brevard, and it's a bit out of town, right?
Yes.
It's out of Asheville. It's in Transylvania County, which is a great name for a county.
Yeah.
I used to live there myself. Lots of waterfalls. It's a beautiful area. So I'll stop talking now and just open the door for you to tell us a little bit about your experience here and your travels.
So I'll talk about Asheville first. First of all, we drove there. My partner at the time and I were, I was on book tour, and we landed, I think we flew to Florida, and then we drove all the way up the coast of Florida, and then we were in Georgia, and then we ended up in Asheville. And as we were climbing, because I had a reading in Durham, where I used to live. And then as we were kind of climbing, and just the view, and it was October like this, and the colors and just the vibration of the land was just, it was like it was sparkling. And I felt immediately lifted. And so by the time that we got to Malaprops, I was already in this, in this kind of, I want to say, exalted state from the land. I was so happy to be back in North Carolina that I loved, and then to be in Asheville, which was just stunningly beautiful, is stunningly beautiful to me. And when I read it was from the novel Heat Signature at that time. And afterwards, the audience they engaged me so passionately, and I want to say and soulfully, that even people who didn't know about the reading were coming in and joining, and it became this beautiful, it was like communing, and so it's one of those readings I will never, ever forget as long as I live. So, and then to the point about traveling, yes, because so being from Los Angeles, which is, I believe that LA has the most language spoken in any other city in the world. I could be wrong about that, but I think that statistic, when I last read it, is still correct. And my mother was from Panama, and so I saw, even though my father was American, I saw the world from the lens of an immigrant, and that also being in this city where people were from all over, or are from all over the world, it made me all the more curious about the world. And so my parents were travelers, and I became very much a traveler. So, and place is very much a part of my writing. I do see terrain as having a psyche, having an identity of its own. And particularly when I'm writing a novel, when there's the space to really give the land its due in terms of how it feels and who it is and what it is, and how it affects the individuals who live there in all kinds of ways, depending on their sensitivity or their vulnerability or their toughness, however it is that they let a place, take them or lead them, or they guard themselves in the place, so all of those things are really important to me as a writer and as a human being.
Mm. So how did you settle on the places that are visited in this collection? And again, I always have more than one question at a time. Were you in those places when you wrote the stories, or were you just reflecting on them? And then, yes, and how did those places and the people in them, in the stories, come to be connected in the book?
So there are 16 stories, and they were chosen for the single thread of there being choice. So I see choice as being what weaves through all the stories, as opposed to, as we're saying, the places are also diverse. The characters are so incredibly diverse, all kinds of different people, and even a couple of different time periods as well. And I think that, and yes, I have been to the countries that appear in the book, England and Germany. I've been to both of those countries, spent quite a bit of time in Germany in particular. But I wrote both stories, both of those stories, those respective stories were written while I was here. So what I think what I tend to do is I go and I don't really take notes about a place. I just kind of really breathe it in. For example, the novel Dive is set equally in California, Florida, and Alaska. And I remember that when I was in Alaska and to research Dive, while doing a reading at in Anchorage at the Barnes and Noble there. But I didn't take notes about Alaska. It was just like walking with the hotel owner's dog took us for a tour, just stopped when he saw a moose, and kind of like, posed like, picture time, it was so enchanting, this like the clean air, so all of these things, I just go and really try to live and take in a place. Then I go home and write about it in terms of it having, become a part of me.
And so when you're home and writing about a place, are you doing additional sort of research at that point? Since you're not taking notes or probably jotting down landmarks or
Yes.
Is there a little?
Strange. It's a very odd way that the story called The Elephant Talker came to me. It came almost as if it was someone else's memory, or someone else's memory became my memory. I actually didn't research so it's set during the Herero tribe genocide. But when the character came to me, because it's from her point of view, it's not like she was articulating, I'm in a genocide. She has a German husband who had, taken her basically. And, it was during, when the Germans had colonized German Southwest Africa. And it's really sort of mystical the way the story came to me, because I woke up to this song by, I think it was just like Spotify, feeding me some song, and it was by a band called Boxer Rebellion. And the song was Diamonds. And this didn't seem to have anything to do with the story, or even that I knew that there was a story, but all of a sudden I started to see her. I saw her and her elephant and her children and the husband and the land. And I actually started crying, because it was just so strange to be inside of someone else and not know where and it's just, and this song is playing. It was like the song had nothing to do with it. So then after I wrote the story, and it was in the journal Black Clock, and we had a reading, and I was reading with 5 other writers, and one of the writers came up to me afterwards and said, what an amazing piece of history about General von Trotka's genocide of German Southwest Africa. And I just, wow, I didn't even, I didn't know about him. I didn't think about him. So then when I Wikipedia'd him, I saw that he was also responsible for the Boxer Rebellion in China. So what is that? How do you explain that?
And you weren't trying to be, and it's fiction, so it's not like you had to,
And I had
do the
spent
research.
2 months in China, in Shanghai. I was in Shanghai. I felt really at home there, and the story came after that too. So it's maybe
you absorbed, maybe there was some sort of osmosis when you were
exactly
when you were in Germany or when you were in China.
Yes.
Yeah. And have you been to Southwest Africa, or was that just a place that you had wanted to go at the time? Maybe?
No, I had really only been to Berlin and the Black Forest and this beautiful little town called Buchen and Frankfurt, but not that particular area.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating that someone else was able to pick out the reality from something that just sort of, was one of those truly out of whole cloth, pieces of fiction, right? Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. So what are some of the other places that are visited in Fluid and what kinds of, and you mentioned the diverse characters, and they really are, and no need to give too much away. We want people to like pick up the book, but just to give them a sense of sort of the kinds of places and people that you're spending time with in these stories.
Okay, so I'm gonna look at the table of contents. So for example, Joie de Vivre is set in New Jersey. And I
That's
did.
great. Love a French title for a New Jersey story.
Yes. And I did spend time there, and the story was inspired by quite a few things, but it was a walk through a cemetery. And though I don't believe the cemetery has much to do with the story at all, it was this particular area of New Jersey. And then let's see, let's see, Glossolalia, where's that set? I met someone, Course in Miracles. Now I'm blanking on wherever, it's like I'm looking at the titles and I'm just seeing the people and not the places.
Right.
Like Random Kid in a Black Hole is set in the valley here, but the main character comes from Arkansas. And so there's a bit about that, and there's a bit about New Mexico in it. There's also another story that goes into a little bit of New Mexico that's set in the Palisades here. And so anyway, yeah, so the characters are talking about a lot of the issues, the challenges that we're going through now. For example, it opens as two men in a gallery discussing transhumanism and AI, and one of the characters has been following the philosopher Nick Bostrom, who may have coined the term transhumanism. And I looked at one of his papers, which was about whether AI deserves rights in terms of if AI becomes conscious or is conscious, does it deserve rights, in terms of, as opposed to being enslaved or, so a lot of these, and also about life and death. That's why it's called Death is Beautiful, because the other character is all about, we're here for this finite perspective, why would we artificially extend our lives, and then there's a story, the one that I just mentioned, Random Kid in a Black Hole. The mother is a surrogate, and her 10-year-old son is trying to understand that. In the last story, The Three Loves of Eva Jones, one of Eva's loves is in a coma and had written before that she wanted to be killed. She wanted to be killed, that's not the word, but euthanized. And so that story is about euthanasia. So there are these kind of, and then I would already mention the genocide. There's a story about past lives. There's so it's, each story is visiting a different issue that involves choice. And particularly, I feel that I chose the title Fluid because for me, I feel like as a writer, it requires a fluidity to be inside of anyone's head, to live someone else's experience. And so I'm also asking that of the reader, I suppose, in being fluid and open-minded with, these vastly different journeys that you go on in 16 stories. And that really, it's why I became a writer. Even as a little kid, I knew from the time I was 5 years old that I wanted to be a storyteller, for the simple fact that I could be inside of anyone's mind and be anywhere in the world between the pages of a book. That was incredible to me. So, when the kindergarten teacher took us to the school library, I started checking out 10 books a week, and my parents kept it up, taking me to the neighborhood library, and I kept doing that, and then I was, writing stories and stapling them together, and so I knew what I wanted to do from the word go, pretty much.
Yeah, that's actually a great segue into talking about you as an artist, and not just one kind of artist. So you knew from a very early age that you wanted to write, but you're also a visual artist.
Yes.
and you also engaged in this documentary project that is fascinating. And you are working on a libretto. So can you talk a little bit about how you came to your arts, and how they interplay with each other, and how any of the rest of what you do, then since it's a book event, then comes back to influence your writing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this I didn't realize until recently. My mother died 4 years ago, but it wasn't until the telling of her story of coming to America and the things that she brought and her intentions. Like she brought a paint set, and she told me early on that she had wanted to be a journalist. And she didn't do either of those things. She ended up being a jewelry designer. But I grew up seeing her copying Charles White's charcoal drawings. And so it was just a part of the household in this. So here, so my mother's drawing with pastels, and then I was in love with books already. So I started drawing as well. So it just became, I didn't think I was going to be a professional artist. And actually in high school, my journalism teacher and my art teacher were making bets as to what I would become, because they were both mentoring me in their respective subjects. And then it wasn't until, I was then showing, and they were both at my shows, that I had a picture with the two of them in this hug saying she became both. So yeah,
that's great. And so do you find that you are, as you are creating visual art, do you find that your mind will also write, right? Like, are you coming up with ideas for the written word and vice versa, as you're writing? Yes. Are you finding that feeds into your visual art?
Somehow it stays very separate in my mind, because when I'm writing, I feel captive at the laptop, and captive inside of this character's point of view, just like, the character that I just read, it was all from her point of view. So, close third. And so it's not even from the omniscient perspective where you get to breathe a little bit and you get to see what others are thinking and feeling. And so while I'm doing that, it's just, I have no other word for it other than being captive. But when I'm painting, it's very much a physical experience for me, like the colors and the texture of the oil paints and the brushes, and I have music playing, and I'm usually standing and I dance, and it's a lot more of a freeing process for me. I feel like my brain and my consciousness isn't taken in the same way. It's kind of like it's a sense of I'm freeing myself. It's the only way so I'm never, the projects are never informing each other. What I'm writing is never informing the painting, and vice versa.
Yeah. Interesting. And so tell us a little bit about your writing process then. So you're captive to the writing when you do it. And do you, I'll ask the standard question that, we almost are obliged to always ask, which is, are you a pantser or a plotter, or is there that distinction?
Yes.
Are you planning things out? Or are they just sort of, it sounds like it more of a pantser situation based on what you said, but that may not be true all the time. And do you have a writing day? Do you have a schedule?
No, I wish I had a schedule.
I'm
not disciplined.
Everybody's different.
Yeah, it's really, but I do tend to be much more productive creatively in the afternoon. In the mornings, I tend to do a lot of emailing and business, you know, like tending to business, that sort of stuff. And in terms of plot, I am not a plotter. That's why the couple of times that I was asked to write a screenplay, it was so completely different. Just like in writing the opera libretto, and the first thing that they also wanted me to do was to do an outline, because, you know, of course, that is helpful to, you know, to the structure of acts.
Yeah.
For Act 1 and Act 2, what's going to happen. But in my fiction, I don't plot out what's going to happen. I just, the character comes to me.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of a short story, it's like I'm getting into a roller coaster car and I'm just strapping in and going with this human, with this person, and what their circumstances are. And when in my process in terms of a novel, when the character arrives, I take notes about the character, because this is going to be a long time that we're going to spend together. So I find out, you know, where they live and how they move through the world. You know, do they feel like life is happening for them or to them? You know, what are their wounds? What are some of the things that they lead with, you know, that they think, you know, well, this I'm good at, this I'm not good at. Like all those kinds of things I take notes about first. Their sibling, do they have siblings? You know, who are their parents? All that. And but still not knowing what the plot is, but it's populating their world for me, so that then I can inhabit them and then go. And so at the end of a novel and at the end of every story, I'm just as surprised by the journey that I've just been on. It's like an adventure.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's great. Like I say, and everybody's different, you know, and writers just have, it's one of the wonderful things about books and, you know, about writing. It's everyone has a different process, a different way to get where they end up. And in the end, it's always, you know, it's as you described, you know, where we can then come along as the readers and lose ourselves in these spaces.
Right.
Crystal Wilkinson, who is an amazing writer and was the poet laureate of Kentucky, was recently in Asheville, and she was talking about, she has it's not out until January, but she has a book coming up called Praise Songs of the Kitchen Ghosts. I think I have the title right. Patricia will put the right title in the chat though, you know. And she also teaches writing. And she was talking about the fact that one of the things she started teaching, she came about writing this memoir with recipes because another food writer here, Ronnie Lundy, had sort of talked to her about how there's always food in her stories.
Yes.
One of the things that she ended up starting to teach, you know, tell her students was, and to start with really is like, if you don't know what your character has for breakfast, right? If you don't know what your character would have for breakfast, then you have work to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, just so what you just said put me in mind of that, you know.
Yes.
There's, you know, and one of the, you know, and food is sort of central to, you know, you have to eat to live, and it's so central to community and that sort of thing. So it was really, I'm not nearly even remotely as eloquent as Crystal Wilkinson. I could listen to her talk all day, but
I met Crystal 20 years ago. I want to say it was 20 years ago, and I think it was both of our first books in Johnson City,
in Tennessee.
Yeah. For it was a book festival.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she's amazing, as you know, then. And yeah, so similarly, you know, that those sort of details, like even if you're not necessarily writing about their family members,
right,
knowing
exactly.
who they are, right? Knowing who they are, with
yes.
If they're, you know, and yeah, knowing what they would eat for breakfast, you know,
right.
or
right.
if they eat breakfast, right? Those sorts of
right.
things. Whether or not those you actually write a breakfast scene is sort of secondary to
Exactly.
filling in, filling in those details about, yeah.
Yes.
So thank you for mentioning that. That's whether you're plotting or not, like if those sort of that seems to be a pretty essential kind of piece of solid writing advice that we hear in terms of, you really have to get to know the people you're writing about.
Yes.
And even if you've made them up, you still have to get to know them.
That's right.
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 Yeah.
That's right. And it's funny because technically, as a fiction writer, you have made up the characters, but I don't feel them that way. I feel them as, living, breathing characters.
Right.
That I couldn't have possibly made them up.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about them.
Right. And I so appreciate short stories in large part because I've always been a really slow reader. And I've worked in books for decades. So so it's a little bit of a challenge, really. I've always been a really slow reader, so I really love short story collections. And so it's one thing when you're writing a novel and you have, usually a fairly, a relatively small set of characters that you're dealing with. When you're writing and of course, you're not writing a collection, right? You're writing stories that become a collection as a rule. But when you write a lot of short stories, it seems that there are then that many more characters that you have spent time with.
Yes.
Necessarily. Some people write lots of characters in novels and write tons of novels, but how long do your characters stay with you as living, breathing people?
Well, it's just like a friend that you haven't seen in a long time that you think of, I wonder what they're doing right now. That's what it's like with my characters. All of them have come to mind in, different moments, that are triggered by whatever it is, like whether it be a smell or a sound. For example, the story that I just read, when she tells the interviewer that she broke the sink and that he can't wash his hands there because she broke it with a shea butter, then I actually heard it break and I smelled the shea butter and that sort of thing. Like, so I might, if I smell shea butter, I might think of her, so all that sort of, so they stay with me in that way.
Yeah. And that's such a great little detail as well, right? And so the fact that then that's a sense memory for you.
Yes, and the sink, the cracked sink, picture that, and her cat lying there at the door wishing that, he would have let her in, just
Yeah, it's great. It was really cinematic, the reading. So I know folks, when they pick up the book, will have more of that in store. So speaking of cinematic, I know this is about your book and writing, but I really cannot let pass the opportunity to hear more about your documentary experience with the BBC. And if you can, and there's writing involved.
Yes.
To be clear, like you were writing for this documentary series but also ended up presenting and Yes.
I mean, it's, that my credit is writer, but what I want to say about what was very new to me about documentary was, so they had read the story collection Glow in the Dark, and they came to my website and they said, we are doing a series on America, and we're asking 4 writers to do 4 different aspects of American culture. And so they asked me to do prom, high school prom, because they said that they did not have that there. My understanding is that now there is some sort of prom thing that goes on there now, but at the time, so this was 2005 that they approached me, and so they went ahead and chose the characters. So then I was thinking, but these are real people. How are they characters? Like, how, And the students, the crew, the director and the producer and the crew flew to LA, and they got to know me for a little bit. They filmed me and my daughter and my partner at the time, like skateboarding at the beach. Like they thought that I was gonna be a character in that way. So they filmed a lot of that footage. That was all, ended up on the cutting room floor. But they also, like, this is something, they also rented a convertible Mustang for me, like, and then filmed me driving down Hollywood
Just
Boulevard.
because it seemed like a quintessential California thing, right? To have you in a
why that did. It was like my car, though, like I had a station wagon at the time that I had painted turquoise, So anyway,
right.
so
But people want to see you top down passing by the palm trees, right?
So then we go to Atlanta, and so they had already chosen the students, and in terms of the writing, it was like I was writing questions for them, but also I was feeling a little protective of what I was seeing as they wanted to see where Southern kids were at politically. And it felt as if, some of the kids were, just like in reality shows, like wanting, the characters who are going to give you some of that,
Right. The
And
extra
so,
drama.
yeah. So there was that. So then me as who, the way I respect teachers and the way I respect students as a teacher, I felt like a lot of the time I was being kind of parental and, and protective. But so in terms of writing, it's different because it's a lot of people, and it's not just me, saying, well, I think it should be these kids, and I think it should be this way. So it's very collaborative, and but all that said, I had a great time, and I think it turned out very well. But it came to me through fiction. So it was like fiction brings me these incredible opportunities, and like with the opera libretto, the director, producer, and composer had been reading the links to stories that I was publishing, stories in various literary magazines and journals last year, and I was posting the links on Instagram, or saying I wrote this, and then the links in the link tree, and they were reading everything, and they said, "Oh, you are our opera librettist." So it's fantastic. So James Dara is the director producer, and Shelley Washington is the composer, and this is for Long Beach Opera, and it's and so far it is the most exciting, amazing, fantastic journey to be on. And also, I didn't know much about the opera world, but I did know about the classical world because my father only allowed classical music in the house. So I grew up, from the age of, I remember they were telling me, my parents were telling me that I was holding on like to the stereo, like Beethoven is playing and I'm shaking my butt, just
Great.
like this is, so, and then also, you'd make more money in terms of your allowance for naming that composer. So I feel a bit like my dad might have had a hand in this from the other side or something, that this came to me.
Yeah.
And
Well, that sounds wonderful. And
yes, it is wonderful.
And wonderful that you were, we mentioned this backstage, that because this is a brand new thing that you've never done, and you're just open to doing it. And I suppose that's part of course, being able to write is to be open, as you've talked about. Yeah, open and fluid, as you've said. So we're actually getting to the top of the hour, which is hard to believe. And I would like to ask you, and it's interesting that you mentioned that your father came up, because this came up backstage as well. I wanted to ask you for a couple of book recommendations.
Yes.
For folks, things that you think people should read in addition to your own books, obviously, which we'll recommend, but yeah, book recommendations.
So right now, what I'm into is a book called Philomath by Robert Edward Grant. And the reason is that this time in my life, my father was a mathematician, like he, at the age of 15, went to college and then was in the space program, computing trajectories to the moon. And then, and to make a long story short, because it was a white world that wasn't, allowing him beyond the glass ceiling, he ended up in an all Black world of a life insurance company, one of the first Black owned life insurance companies in Los Angeles. And then when we were in Durham for the other all Black owned life insurance companies, both historic. But the math and classical music were his, languages. And so I grew up with that music, and I grew up playing chess with him every day. But I've been getting so lazy with numbers in terms of, I don't know. I thought, do I know my daughter's phone number by heart? And so then I thought, and Robert Edward Grant's book is about geometry and math and art, the science of art and the science of math, and this meeting. And so that's the perfect space for me. And then I'm reading something that's very unusual for me to be reading as well. Olaf Stapleton's Sirius. And so it's a sci-fi novel that was written in 1944. I don't read a lot of science fiction, but I was at a friend's place, and I was looking at his bookshelf, and I was just drawn to it. And it's about a dog called Sirius who was, by a scientist, that he had his consciousness download a human consciousness in a dog. It's almost like it's a bit like, like what's going on with transhumanism, about like uploading your consciousness to live forever. Like there's all kinds of elements to transhumanism. But what's interesting about this is how the dog, in living in a dog's body, is looking at humanity, like what humanity does, what humans do to each other, and this kind of, there's a lot of judgments, very interesting judgments. And then when he goes into his dog, his dog self, and then having disgust for that. So there's like this there's a lot of self-reflection in terms of embarrassment for being human, embarrassment for being a dog, embarrassment for the atrocities that we commit against one another. And so those two books are informing my my world right now, outside of what's going on in the world. We all know, like we've got a lot going on.
Yeah.
And these books are helping me right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing those. They both sound fascinating. I am a sci-fi reader and had not heard of that book. So, I'll definitely take that recommendation to heart, both of them to heart. Although I'm one of those people who left math behind in high school and hasn't really looked back. So I might need to pick up the other one as well. Yeah. So before we say goodnight, what two things? What are you working on now, other than the libretto, if anything? And what would you like for readers to? And we know that you want them to be open to everything, but is there anything that in particular that you'd like for readers to get from Fluid?
I would love for them to get the sense of all of our humanity, and us and a sense that, you know, that old saying of walking a mile in someone else's shoes is so valid. And that's, I find that to be a really important thing to do, because we spend a lot of time in our own bubbles, whether we're going to the grocery store or where the gas station, whatever, and not, you know, thinking about others, what maybe why this person didn't hold the door open for you, when you were right behind them, those kinds of things that can, you know, become a lot bigger. And then what I'm working on is so the libretto is my entire focus, but there is a character who is, you know, she's hanging out, and what's wild is that I already know what the title is, but I'm going to keep it to myself. But just I know this, I can feel the journey that she wants to take me on.
And you think this will be a novel eventually?
Yes, this will be a novel. This will be a
Okay.
novel. Yeah.
Great. Well, we have that to look forward to. Lisa Teasley, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you this evening.
It's been such a
and to
pleasure.
hear you read. Yeah,
Thank
you so much.
So much. And
Yeah.
I love your bookstore.
Thank you.
I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. We appreciate you. And just a reminder to folks before we leave that, you know, of course, we'd love for you to pick up a copy of Fluid from Malaprops, and if not Malaprops, another local indie, or your library. Libraries are amazing, and librarians are amazing as well. So go say hi to your local library. Lisa Teasley, thank you so much. And everyone who's been with us, thank you. And we hope to see you again soon. Good night.
Good night.